Okay, I want to do a quick little video on proteins. And we said in class that proteins have 4 levels of structure. And so what we mean by this is that proteins are gigantic molecules, these macromolecules that are made of individual repeating units. And the first level of structure there, that primary level of structure, is just that sequence of monomers. And the monomers for proteins are amino acids. So I just have individual letters here that are representing amino acids. And so this string of them is my primary structure of a protein. And in fact, the longest word in the English language, at least according to dictionaries, is the reading out of a protein sequence. Each of the individual amino acid names in a protein takes a really long time to read out loud. Look it up. Okay, so that's the primary sequence. If we move forward to the secondary sequence, then we have these distinctive pieces of structure, okay, that are called alpha helixes and beta pleated sheets that are caused because of the interactions between this sequence of amino acids. So because of the R groups on those amino acids, they're going to interact with each other in specific ways. And so there might be an attraction that's causing some these coils to keep themselves together. It's usually hydrogen bonding in this particular case, and so that's allowing this to coil up just like a spring, like a slinky. And then if we look at this here, this causes folds. These are called beta pleated sheets, and there's this interaction between the amino acids on one strand. So if this first strand here is one side of my strand, this is another side, then the R groups on my amino acids are going to be interacting with each other. And again, that's through this hydrogen bonding, this attraction between the two. And it causes them to fold up kind of like a paper fan. So that's the secondary structure. If we increase our complexity of the structure of our proteins, then we end up with tertiary structure, which is all the bends and folds in the overall strand of the protein. And so it could look something like this. This is a terrible drawing. It looks like a 4-year-old drew it, although not as good as if a 4-year-old drew it. So if we have our protein strand here, here's an alpha helix, and we kind of come around the bend, and there's these bends and folds that cause certain parts of the protein to want to be in certain areas and other parts to not be in those areas. So this has to do with things like being hydrophobic, not liking water, fearing water, being hydrophilic, so being like wanting to dissolve or be surrounded by water. We have another alpha helix in here that's held together with hydrogen bonding, some beta pleated sheets. So certain things like to bond and link together for other regions, and you can get into more detail on that in higher levels of chemistry. But that's the tertiary structure. So in one strand, it's the 3-dimensional bends and folds that occur because of the interaction between that primary sequence of amino acids. And then if we want to increase our level of structure further, and not all proteins do this, but for some proteins to be biologically active, we have quaternary structure, which means that we have more of one of these strands interacting together. And that's kind of like our hemoglobin, which has these 4 different protein strands that are interacting together with the heme groups in order to work as a red blood cell in our body. Now there's a variety of different roles of proteins and different things that proteins will do in our bodies. And I want to just talk about a few of them because there's a lot. So I just want to focus in on a couple of the main ones. The first role of proteins is that they act like catalysts, and that's in the same way that we've talked about the energy of chemical reactions before. We said a catalyst speeds up a chemical process, and they do that by lowering the amount of energy it needs to occur. So catalysts do the same things except in a biological system. So in our bodies, these proteins that act as catalysts are called enzymes, and you've probably heard the word enzyme before. And these are things that speed up biological processes so that they can occur in the time that we need them for our bodies. The next role of proteins is an immune function. So any antibodies, which I know you've heard of antibodies before, antibodies are the things that identify and try to remove or at least elicit an immune response from the body. When there's viruses or bacteria or stuff that's not supposed to be in there, then antibodies will trigger an immune response. And these antibodies are proteins as well. Structure. So hair, skin, nails, these are all proteins. You've probably heard of keratin or collagen. Collagen is what you use in lip implants. So if you want puffier lips, then you get collagen implants. Keratin is in hair and nails. Just that provides structure for the body. Movement. Proteins are responsible for muscle contractions. So that would be actin and myosin. It's an O in there. Actin and myosin are responsible for muscles contracting, and so we wouldn't be able to move at all without proteins in our body. And the last one that I wanted to talk about was transport. And so transport just means that it moves important things around our bodies, and that could be through the bloodstream, like in hemoglobin, which is in our red blood cells. For instance, hemoglobin transports oxygen. So we need oxygen in various parts of our bodies in order to do a number of different biological functions. And again, we're not going to get into detail on that. But the hemoglobin, because of the iron ion that's in the heme group, attracts these oxygen molecules. And so these oxygen molecules then can be carried in our bloodstream to wherever they're needed in the body. Okay, so these are just some roles of proteins. Here's 5 of them. These are kind of the main ones, but there's lots of others because proteins are so varied. They just do a lot of different things in our bodies. So that kind of caps off that little section on proteins, and if you have any questions, don't hesitate to ask.